Thank you for coming today to virtual interviewing, how to plan, prepare, and succeed. My name is Stephanie Salazar-Can, and I work in the College of Engineering and Engineering Career Services. So today we're going to talk a little bit about interviewing virtually in two capacities. One really being video interviewing and the other being AI interviewing. And as we go through today, I'll try to keep those as separated as possible so you have an understanding of where we're going with each. So starting off with video interviewing has been around for quite a while and is kind of increased in use and interest by employers, obviously with the pandemic, but in general, as employers are realizing that necessarily having to come to campus or to try to get more individuals involved in the interviewing process, that video conferencing options allow them more flexibility. So it's just like the career fairs that have been happening in Handshake, where you're on a Zoom call or you're integrated with a feature like Microsoft Teams, and there's live person on the other end of the conversation with you as the candidate. With some of the programs like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, your GoToMeeting specifically, you may be required to install software prior to being able to use the system. And so that's just something to be aware of as you move into your interviewing time. Video conferencing interviews across the board tend to be live with a real person, which is one of the differentiating features between video conferencing and AI. AI stands for artificial intelligence interviewing and often relies on a pre-described set of questions that are integrated into the interview itself. It can be live or recorded, meaning that you could be doing it live in that moment with something like an avatar on the other side of the camera, or recorded where you may see a prompt for a question. You'll see a countdown timer, and then you'll be asked to respond to that question and record that option. As I said, you may or may not have a real person. For the most part with AI interviewing, you're not going to be interviewing with a live person at that time. A live person will see your materials, see the outcome of your interview, but you may not be actually doing the live interview with somebody. The programs used for AI interviewing vary, but one of the leading industry leaders is HireVue, and we'll talk a little bit more about HireVue as we get to the second half of our presentation today. And really, AI interviewing, one of the biggest benefits for employers is that it's automatically integrated into the applicant tracking system that that organization already uses, so they can follow the entire timeline of your candidacy with their organization, including the interviews, all in one spot. So in terms of the what and the why of AI interviewing, for the most part, AI interviews are used for first round job interviews. The AI questions are embedded into the position already. So if they're looking for somebody with excellent communication skills, strong attention to detail, and design experience in the job description, they will have coded on the back end specific questions that are set to measure your experience or your efficacy with those areas. For employers at the end of your interview, what they'll get is a competency profile that will show them where you're kind of stacking up against the metrics that are built into the system. And they'll be able to see not only your interview, but your interview in parallel or in conjunction with all the other individuals who came through for that interview cycle. So what that does is allows them to make an easier evaluation of the interview itself, without necessarily having to have the personal bias in there of whether you guys just got along well, whether there was something distracting about your background, et cetera, so on. Everything is kind of couched within that competency profile right there. And really, the increase in use for AI interviewing, even before the pandemic, really had to do with a need to find better ways to screen and filter applicants out. Beyond just, the right major, a GPA that has historically worked well for them, a specific school that they recruit at, wanting to really provide opportunity for qualified candidates coming from a wide variety of backgrounds. And so this has really allowed them to increase their recruiting pool. So for example, if an employer normally could have 5 interviewers, each of them doing 10 interviews, that's only going to get them, 50 interviews. They may need actually 200, 300 interviews, but from a timing perspective, just don't have the bandwidth to do so. they can offer more interviews to students and candidates using the AI interview than they would normally, so that you can move into an interview stage quicker and more students can have the opportunity to showcase their experiences. So all systems, when we're talking technology, definitely come with a series of cautions. And for AI interviews, they kind of fall into two buckets. One has to do with the quality of the work being done behind the scenes to create an equitable program where things like accents and pronunciation or word ambiguity or key phrases that are common in certain areas of the world that aren't common in certain other areas, how that is all translating into the system itself. Coders do their very best to try to limit bias in the way that the products are created. But there still is potentially systemic bias kind of built into the program. So legislation has come to kind of support the AI interview, and really first off coming from Illinois, where there is now the Artificial Intelligence Video Interview Act in place. And what this does is just provide a little bit more guidance to employers and candidates about how AI interviewing can be used. So first off, the law requires that employers give notice to the individual who will be being interviewed through the AI process, an explanation of what the AI process is, and then to get consent that you're okay with going forward with the interview, knowing that it is an AI interview. Lastly is maintaining of confidentiality, so not changing or moving your responses or any part of the video process into a secondary source or off of a secured hiring platform, and to destroy copies of that AI interview after the time frame in which that application is active. So how do they work? So 85% of what the AI interview scores off of is word choice. So what you're actually saying, the content of the words. And then the other component is around the facial coding for the most part in terms of eye contact, smiling, facial expressions, tone of voice, all of those sorts of features. As I had mentioned in a couple of slides before, the top type of question used in an AI interview are behavioral-based questions. And so things like stories and metaphors are helpful, especially to provide context to a response. So providing a short story that articulates how you may have worked in a group or that showcases your experience in design can be helpful in terms of the system scoring you as high as you could score, and also for just clarity of information. The average response time is about 3 minutes per response. We have seen it as low as 1 minute and up to as long as you need within the time frame. But for the most part, preparing for a 3-minute response is best. So how do we plan? We want to start out by really thinking about the physical space, your access to Wi-Fi, lighting, microphone, webcam, all those different features so that you can be as prepared as possible to use as many different components as you need. You want to make sure that you're reviewing the job posting to look for potential soft skills or transferable skills, so things like that communication or that attention to detail, to give you a little insight into maybe a better way to prepare some of your responses. You want to learn about the software that's being used. Just like with an applicant tracking system, oftentimes the software for that specific interview is hidden in the URL for it. And so once you find that piece, you can jump out to the vendor site. So it'll have HireVue, let's say, in the URL for the interview. You could jump out to HireVue's website and learn a little bit more about how they showcase their product to somebody who were trying to buy the software. And really that can give you some really nice pointers as to how to prepare, what some of the features are going to look like. And oftentimes there'll be like a little mock-up demo on how the system works, and you can kind of get a feel for what that looks like as well. So for video interviewing, for the Zooms, the Microsoft Teams, the Google Meets, etc., a couple of things to know. Similar to the AI interviewing is you want to understand about the platform, right? So whether you're going to have access to screen sharing or presenting, sometimes it's called different things in different places, whether you have a raise your hand feature, or video mute, audio mute, whether you can upload a document into it, whether there's a chat virtual backgrounds or blurring. All those different components can help you feel more prepared with the system as you're heading into a video interviewing situation. For AI interviews, the functionalities to be looking out for are how many tries do you get per response? Do you get to review that submission before you actually decide that's the one you want to use? What's your total time and how many questions? And if you re-record, does that delete your previous response or do you get to pick? A couple things with that is if you can re-record and you know you really botched an answer, by all means, please do. But on the other hand, if you feel like it was a pretty decent go, move on to the next question so that you have the opportunity to get through all the questions needed in the time allotted, because you never know necessarily which question is going to take you a little bit more time or if you're going to really mess up on a response and you want to re-record that. So it doesn't have to be a perfect take, but yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with that. And if you're kind of going through and you're starting to get prepared for an interview and you are really, really unsure of how to go, what steps to go on to, how to prepare, ask the recruiter some questions about the process. If you're not sure if it's going to be a live interview or if it's going to be recorded or how long, send an email to that recruiter, reach out. They want you to be successful, so they'll share with you as much information as they can. So in terms of preparing yourself for the interview, revisit the behavioral-based questions to focus on those soft skills, as I said. Plan out your stories and time your responses. For a story, make sure you have a beginning, middle, and end, that you're including details that will help somebody understand the context and how you fit in with it. And try to use your entire resume. Sometimes we have maybe one or two experiences that we feel like we could always go to talk about pretty much anything that could come up in an interview. But really then all the interviewer is learning about are those two experiences, and you've got a whole slew of different opportunities and experiences that have brought you to the table at that point. So try to look ahead and kind of plan out to use different parts of your resume so that all of it's being included in the experience you're being evaluated on. The how is important, and so is the outcome. So in those stories, how you accomplished something, what that accomplishment was, is helpful to really round things out and to make sure that you're preparing for that complete answer. And practice. As always, just like you would for any other interview, practice is really essential. Try to get some FaceTime with somebody on your laptop where they can tell you whether you seem to be looking over to the side or not making good eye contact, and try not to memorize your responses. Just be comfortable with them, maybe have a couple of notes, but nothing that you would want to be sitting down to read. So lastly, how can ECS help you? We have a repository of behavioral-based questions that's from our ECS job search guide. It's available on our website. We also have a HireVue practice link for you where you can go in and get comfortable with the platform. It will look the same as it should for interviews with actual employers. There's some sample questions. You can do as many takes of that as you want and kind of see what you look like if you'd rather say one thing or the other, just to get you familiar, right? Across the board, the more familiar you are with the platform, the easier you will navigate through it. Just like Canvas, you're spending a lot of time in Canvas now versus maybe a couple of semesters ago when you weren't in there quite so much. Your familiarity with the program gives you an ease of use. And then lastly is mock interviews. These can be set up one-on-one straight through Starfish, and in there you can put in the notes what platform you'd like to try out. So if you want us to conduct a one-on-one with you on Zoom, or on WebEx, or on Google Meeting, or on what else, Microsoft Teams, just let us know and we'll transfer your one-on-one mock interview session over to that platform so you can get some experience there as well. So with that, I'll close out our session today and open it up to questions, and we'll cancel out our recording here as well.